Welcome back to the next installment of What Are You Into, the AIGA Asheville video series. This is Sarah, and I'm so excited to be here today with Gabriel Swinney. Welcome, Gabe. And as usual, we're going to be digging into some of the things that our members are most passionate about outside of just their work. So, Gabe, I know that you are a fantastic photographer. You do all sorts of cool video and 3D modalities. And so I'd love for you to share with everybody a little bit about your business and what you do.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. And also, it's just so awesome to be here with you today. Yeah, I've been a commercial photographer in Asheville for a little more than 5 years now. I do a ton of work with architecture, interiors, and with a lot of local businesses. And we do a tremendous amount of drone work and also the creation of 3D models. Yeah, that's about sums up the business side of things.
Awesome. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today because I know that you are a really passionate traveler like I am. It's one of my sort of favorite things about life. And you had mentioned to me that you did some work in the Scottish Highlands where you pioneered a sort of pilgrimage route, an ancient pilgrimage route. So first of all, I'm just curious, how did you end up doing something like that? Like, how do you get a job like that?
That's a great question. And the honest is, I don't really remember. What I do recall was that one day I was at home taking care of the kids while my wife was teaching for Buncombe County schools. And I took the day off and I was hanging out with the kids, and I think maybe it was nap time, and I was just doing research because I've always been passionate about and loved the concept of pilgrimage. Pilgrimage travel just always resonated with me. But you know, a lot of people are familiar with the most famous pilgrimage route in the world, the Santiago de Compostela, the pilgrimage across Spain. And I thought, you know, what else is out there? What might I not know about? So we're just searching and searching and searching and looking for some way I could justify to my clients, friends, and family that I wanted to go take off and explore some part of Europe. And I started finding information about the Way of St. James. I'm sorry, the Way of St. Andrews in Scotland. And basically, it's a series of routes to St. Andrews that had been started throughout different times, some all the way back to like the 5th century, and some even predating that back to like, mysterious Druidic roots. And so this sounds amazing. So I started doing more research, and I found out that the revitalization of those routes had been spearheaded by a nonprofit of the same name. And so I thought, well, I'll just send an email to their website, just info at, and be like, hey, I'm a photographer from Asheville, North Carolina. I would love to come to Scotland and photograph some of these areas and walk one of these routes. And as it turns out, one of the longer routes, Columba's Way, from the amazing holy island of Iona off the west coast, across the highlands of St. Andrews, not a lot of people had done it. And the people that had only done bits and pieces. And so when I heard back from the nonprofit, they were enthusiastically welcomed my participation. So I started planning a trip, went over there and almost died a bunch of times, had a great adventure, made tons of friends. It was wonderful.
My gosh, that's amazing. So share with everybody, what is a pilgrimage? Just, how does that define in general? I'm just curious, as far as like sort of the world, is there sort of some understanding of what a pilgrimage is? And then also, do you have like a personal meaning to it? Because I know for me, when I'm traveling, definitely there's always kind of this overview that I read about from everybody else. But then as I do my travels, of course, things become so much more personalized. So I'd love to get your take on that. Like, what is a pilgrimage in general? But then how in your experience of it, what do you really think it is?
Oh, that's a wonderful question. And you know what? Actually, I looked up the definition because, like, what is that? And the just straight up definition is pretty right on. And I'd say it's really, really close to how I feel too. And that's that a pilgrimage is a journey, often into an unknown or foreign place, where a person goes in search of new or expanded meaning about their self, others, nature, or a higher good, through the experience. It can lead to a personal transformation, after which the pilgrim returns to their daily life. So in a way, it's kind of like a travel and adventure version of the hero's journey, going out into something less known to you, where you kind of go back into like almost an infant-like perspective of just discovery, being open. And then for me, it also tends to include a level of arduousness. And even if that's just, walking across an unknown land where you don't really even know where you're going to sleep that night or what's going to happen. And then as your body, starts to ache and hurt after days and days, like I feel like it resets something that, at least me personally, I need to reset regularly, to just gain perspective and open up to possible transformations, to keep trying to be more, to be better, to learn. And so that's why I keep going out there and trying to find these adventures, these trips. It's, in my experience, the only real magic that I've ever found in the world. I mean, apart from the general magic of love and family, I would say that there's something almost psychologically alchemical about it. That if you undergo these experiences, it gives you the opportunity to really break down the self and to forge it into something new and inspired by that journey and history and wonder.
So you really struck me with the phrase psychologically alchemical, right? I think that's a really powerful way to explain it, because certainly for me, when I've done various travels, it's like you said, it's like a really deep shifting of my perspective can happen in those moments. So that's really amazing. I want to dig into that just a little bit more.
Yeah.
So to me, what you're talking about, like I said, that transformation that you're talking about is really the outcome, kind of the driver for people to take trips like this. I'm curious, what are there certain moments in life where you get motivated towards it? Are there certain things that, push you in that direction? Have you talked to other people where they have that same thing? So just for instance, like as you were talking about that, I was thinking about how some of my friends who've walked the Appalachian Trail, they didn't call it a pilgrimage, but I was like, wow, that's really one of those things where you're like, yeah, that's a pilgrimage when you
100%.
walk the App Trail. And I know a lot of them had like momentous things in their lives that like pushed them in that direction. Not just with Scotland, but with some of your other travels. Was there some sort of impetus or some sort of thing that pushed you in that direction? Yeah. Special moments, or is it just that you're always in that state of seeking that out?
Oh my gosh. Well, I totally agree with what you're saying about the AT being really, I would say, the American pilgrimage. And for me, I did a giant section of it over the course of a month before I was injured when I was 18 years old. And that was very much part of my introduction to the idea, the feeling, the sensation of pilgrimage. And what led me to the AT or to Scotland or to any of the other trips or routes that I've done, it's always been, well, I guess to quote the great thinker Michael Scott, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. And I went and I got on the Appalachian Trail because I had a dream that an angel told me I was supposed to. And I was 18 and it's vagabond wandering around the country, just having random adventures, lucky to survive. And so I thought, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. I always look for some little sign or omen or synchronistic happening telling me which way to go. And I was really kind of laissez-faire and happy-go-lucky about life in those days. And then the more I did follow those little signs and omens, the better things worked out, the greater my adventures were, and the more wonderful the relationships I would discover turned out to be. So I guess for me, I know that there's actually a term for it. I think it's the Bader-Meinhof effect, that all of a sudden, when you learn about something new, you start seeing it more and more around you. And objectively, you could say that it's because of how our brains are just shaped to recognize patterns. And so once something becomes new, you start to see that it was where it is around you more and more often. But I believe that it's kind of just sometimes these journeys, these adventures that call us. And so I'm always listening for that call. I don't know, it gives me such a sense of peace, just keeping my eyes and ears open, looking for what's next. It was like that with Scotland, and why I started searching for pilgrimage routes around that area at that time, because I kept seeing things about Scotland everywhere and about the island of Iona. And so it all kind of culminated in that trip, which after walking it, I 100% believed that I was supposed to, that it was exactly where I needed to be.
That's so awesome because I did that early on in my adulthood too. Uh, when I left college, well, the first college I was at, I left after the first year. It's funny, I sort of took a backpack and just, well, because basically I think I freaked out about being an adult. So I decided after a year of adulting that I needed to just grab a backpack, and I wandered all over New England for about four
Oh,
months
I love that.
and just let myself randomly end up places, which was really interesting. I ended up exploring a lot of Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, where
Hmm.
my family is actually from. And then when I was 22, the first like real pilgrimage I think I took was when I did a cross country trip for 3 months, and I ended up in San Francisco, which was kind of funny because it seems weird to be like I took a pilgrimage to San Francisco, but
Totally.
I was just out there. And when I first arrived in San Francisco, one of the first places I went is this place called Land's End. It's actually sort
Mhm.
of like a park now where you got hiking trails. It's right on the ocean. Um, but it's funny because now every time I go back to the West Coast to San Francisco or the Bay Area, I go there specifically. And that's what I did this
Oh,
time. And like every time for the last 20 years that I've been in that city, I go to that same place and I meditate there. And I like think about what it was like the first time I arrived there and saw the Pacific Ocean for the first time. Like,
I love that.
yeah, it blew my mind. Like it was so beautiful and special. Um, and it was funny because 23 years ago, it was a little wilder. Like they've cleaned it up
Hmm.
now. So there's trails and it's like
Sure.
safer. And but the first time I went there, it was kind of like run down. Nobody really realized how I think special it was fully.
Ah,
So yeah, that's really cool because I'd never thought about that early part of my life as
oh,
really a pilgrimage, but it really was. I had always wanted to go to California. I had always wanted to go out there and see the things I saw in movies.
yeah.
Um, so yeah, so that's amazing. I really love that you did that too. I did a lot of wandering the first like 7 or 8 years of
I,
like being an adult, quote unquote.
I think it's so important. I think it's almost a missing link in development in our culture. My grandfather was just one of the most amazing, wise, gentle people I've ever known in my life. He had a real philosophical look at life. And he said that all young people need a time to be vagabonds, to go out into the world, to find out what the world is to you and who you are to the world. And I agree with it wholeheartedly. I think we all need that, or at least are better off for it.
Yeah, and in some ways we're so lucky that truly we have a country that's so big. There's so much you can do right here. I mean, I love
Absolutely.
leaving the country, of course, but I think, the first thing that I did before I really started leaving the country and traveling was I spent a lot of time just exploring our country because it's like
Me
just
too.
amazing. It's like endless the things you can do on our part of the continent. So that's awesome. So I'm
Oh,
curious, what outside of Scotland, because I have a big as I mentioned to you before, I'm
yeah,
Scotland is where my family, well, they said we were Irish, but the more that I dug into our
yep.
ancestry, we're actually really Scottish.
It's the same with
Um,
me, actually.
yeah, we just got booted out. Eventually, it's
Hmm.
sent to Ireland. And so Scotland's definitely on my list of places that I've always wanted to go. And I know it's hard when you're like, you and I have been a lot of places. I think I love all of them equally in different ways.
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know what are some of the other places that you felt were really kind of pilgrimage oriented that were really your favorite?
Well, in my mind all the time now is Japan for sure. And that was the most recent pilgrimage on the Kumano Koto route, which was, oh my gosh, just a dream. And that was basically almost the closest thing in like Western European history mythology to associate with the stories in Japan that led to this pilgrimage route would be like the Arthurian legends, kind of like almost all the way back to prehistory. And, and everything cultural, as I understand it or learned in Japan, really has to do with the intermingling of Shintoism and Buddhism, which coexist there. And so the pilgrimage was to visit these three grand shrines. And at each location, there was a Buddhist temple and a Shinto shrine, but they were all there to pay homage to some aspect of nature and time. And so one of them was, Nachi Falls, which is this 4-story pagoda it has to do with the future and also water. And that waterfall is a literal like god, a Shinto spirit. It's the highest waterfall in Japan, and just being there is incredible. And I remember that was the last of the 3 grand shrines I visited, and going down there to the base of the falls and drinking the water and just feeling like this magical transformation after, the weeks of walking and exploring. So yeah, Japan is huge for me. And of course, I'm always dreaming about what's next. And remembering Scotland, oh my gosh, like that trip ultimately, was extremely painful. And in some ways you would say it was a disaster because of the near-death experiences and everything. But I made so many wonderful friends.
I really like too that you said, part of what a pilgrimage is about is having that kind of challenge, right? It's funny because one of the last pilgrimages I did was I had always dreamed when I turned 40 that I would go back to where I was born in Belgium, and I really wanted to go back there. I only lived there as a small kid, so I don't really remember any of it. And yet it was kind of like a story my parents told me my whole life. So my dad had always told me he was going to take me back, but God love him, he's a little cheap. And so I was like, I don't think he's going to pay for this trip to Europe.
Oh.
I was like, I'm going to do it myself, and I'm just going to go. And he was so supportive. He gave me so much information about, the town where I grew up or where I was born and where I lived when I was a kid, and how him and my mom, lived there. And I got to see the apartment where I lived when I was a baby and stuff like
That's
that, which was
awesome.
really fun. But one of the things that I think really made that like a true pilgrimage was it was like a heavy lift for me personally. Like I went to Europe for a month. I traveled all around by myself. I speak no French, and the little French I do is horrendous. So I was not exactly like fully embraced by the French part of Belgium. They were just like, please stop talking. Your French is so terrible. So it was just like, for me to be alone in a country where I don't speak the language, that was really a first for me. I've been in a lot of Spanish speaking countries because I speak the language there. So I think that's interesting because I think that's what makes a pilgrimage different than a vacation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I almost feel like when you start running into these obstacles, these difficulties, it's almost a good luck sign. Like every time I've gone somewhere, the airline always loses my luggage in my backpack, and I'm always like, yes, like that, like it's a good sign. This is gonna be a great adventure. And Scotland was very much like that. My backpack was gone. I was in Edinburgh for a couple of days waiting for that, and meeting with the group that was, kind of sponsoring, supporting the trip, which was an adventure in and of itself. And then it was over to Iona, which I'd read and heard so much about. And one thing you often hear, almost cliche, about the island of Iona is that it has this energy, this kinetic charge that's so powerful that when some people arrive and get off the ferry, that they're uncomfortable and they can't even handle it, and they turn around and they get right back on the boat and leave. And I didn't know how much I believed that and how much of it was superstitious nonsense. But I was really curious, like, am I going to feel something? And I remember getting off the boat there onto that island, and that it wasn't some kind of tingle, like the feeling you'd get before a thunderstorm, which is what I'd expected. Instead, it was more like when you wake up in the middle of the night and your house is quiet and you're nervous, you hesitant to break that silence. Like you need a drink of water to go to the bathroom. And so you find yourself padding around the darkness of your home. It felt like that kind of full, thick silence, but in the presence of noise at the same time. It was so interesting. And I thought that feeling of being there, and after already having lost my luggage, that the rest of the trip was going to probably be smooth sailing and meaningful, that it'd be tough, like a big backpacking trip, but it'd be fine. It was so much harder than that. I was a hiking guide in Alaska for a while, walking across the Scottish Highlands, in particular, the Ross of Mull, which was the first section after Iona, was harder than anything I ever did in Alaska. I did not see that coming. It was midsummer and there were foxgloves everywhere, and I was just in love by them. They were so beautiful. And so I was walking through this like park-like area called the Terrarigan Estate on my first day of really hiking. And I saw this enormous oak tree, I guess kind of like you would see in the deep south here, like the Angel Oak by Charleston, just gnarled branches reaching down and touching the ground and then back up. Underneath it were hundreds of foxgloves, just giant, like vine-like flowering plants with just these gloves everywhere, and shafts of light coming down in between the oak branches, dappling the foxgloves. And it was just one of the most beautiful scenes I've ever seen. And I walked off the trail down to it, and I just thought, what a mysterious place. Like some of the Scots have said, it felt like it had something of the Fae about it. And sure enough, after going there, I became crazy lost for the rest of the day, wandering through bracken wastes with these lacerating vines where you can't see the ground, like up to my chest, of just big green leaves and these spiky vines. And I was wearing shorts, just tearing my legs up. I was bleeding. The bugs were starting to get bad. Although there's only 2 types of snakes in Scotland. One of them's venomous. They're extremely rare. I saw like 3 or 4 in the first couple of hours. And so I have no idea if I'm going to step on them going through the bracken waste, nearly fell off a cliff, ended up sleeping on this amazing, oh, you know what? I'm just going to keep rambling forever. I'm sorry. But yeah, it was a great adventure. But yeah, I guess the point is that once the difficulties really began and I really started being broken down, that's really when some of the most magical events and experiences started to take place.
Well, and I mean, yeah, I mean, just for the record, I love your rambling because I think, like I said, you know, a lot of times if you want to take a vacation, that's one thing, right? I think a vacation is about relaxing, rejuvenating, you know, having some quiet, you know, being somewhere beautiful. But I feel like, you know, the times that I've done something where it really felt like a pilgrimage, it's exactly what you described. It's like, it just pushed me, you know, it pushed me. It was like, how bad do you really want this? How bad do you really want this experience? Are you willing to walk through your fear to have the experience that you want to have? Because that's definitely what I felt when I went to Belgium. You know, there was just times where I was so uncomfortable during that trip. But I also had these times where like I remember being in Brussels the first week I was there, and I was staying with some people I'd never met. Like I'd met this one woman like one time, like 10 years before. I'm like staying in this tiny apartment with her and her boyfriend in the city. And they were wonderfully nice. I mean, I never would have survived that trip if they hadn't given me kind of a landing pad when I first got there. But it also felt like, wow, okay, so I'm going to be gone from home for 5 weeks. I don't know anybody. I'm just like in this tiny apartment, like interrupting these people's lives. I was like, I feel so uncomfortable. Like I should have maybe gotten my own space, but like, you know, she helped me really acclimate to just the whole country and just to understand the culture a little bit more, you know, like she was just really like giving me this beautiful gift. But that first week I was so sort of awkward, right? Again, because I didn't speak the language. So it felt like I spent a lot of time sitting with people while they spoke French. And I didn't really understand what they were saying, and I didn't want to interject. And then you don't want to be the jerk who's like, could you continuing to ask people could you please speak English? And so I was so awkward. You know, I'm a very like extroverted person. So it was weird to be in this awkward space. But I remember that first week I went to Grand Place and in the center of Brussels, and it was Christmas time. They had all these things lit up, but I had this moment where they were projecting all these lights on the buildings and they were playing this music. And I just happened to be walking through the center, having no idea they were going to do that. And then all of a sudden, like all the buildings around me, like lit up in different colors. And they had a DJ spinning music. And so this music started and all the lights would change on the buildings, like to the music.
Yeah.
And it was so magical that like I had this moment where literally I started crying because I was like, this moment is for me. Like the universe made this moment for me to stand here and like feel and experience this. You know, and that's exactly what happened to me. Like the beginning of that trip, the first few days, I was like, this is awkward. I suck. I should have gotten better at my French. Like, I'm not going to be able to make any friends. Like, this is going to be me, like very lonely on this trip and what's going to happen. And I feel like after I like pushed through it and was like, look, just keep going. You're only like 3 or 4 days in. Don't get scared and give up. It was like all of a sudden I got rewarded with this moment that like, is so special. I will probably be like, I will be 85 years old and I will remember that moment as clear as a bell, you know, like.
I love that feeling.
And even the fact that there was, and I don't know if you feel this way when you've had like those moments in Scotland, but it was realizing there's nobody else here to witness it. There's nobody else here to share it with. Nobody else is going to have this memory. That's why like, it's a gift from the universe to me.
I
personally.
100% agree. And going back to the reference or the analogy of pilgrimage being like the hero's journey, the final step of the hero's journey is returning home, transformed with
Yeah.
the ability to transform others. You bring that back, that gift, that moment, that memory, the beauty of it, and it becomes indelible as a part of your soul that you can share with other people. And I mean, and that it comes oftentimes at the tail end of so much art or so much difficulty. The very lowest point for me in Scotland was I was probably 2 or 3 days away from the final point, and it had been raining for days. I had mind destroying shin splints, awful blisters. Every step was agony for me. I was using trekking poles, which I generally don't do, just to take some of the weight off of my feet. But I didn't want to give up. And I'd been alone for weeks and weeks, just one step after another, oftentimes just walking until the middle of the night and collapsing on the ground. And I was near, oh, I was outside of Perth, 2 days from St. Andrews, and I couldn't find the trail. But looking at my map, it seemed like I must be really close, just on the other side of this forest. And it had been raining for days. It was still raining. And so I thought, I'm just going to bushwhack through the forest. I'll intersect with a trail. That'll be easy walking, and I'll follow that for the rest of the day. And I kind of go into the forest, and it's just this damp kind of like, it looks like mud, but it's like pretty sturdy that I'm walking on. And I take a few steps, and all of a sudden, my first trekking pole goes pop through the ground. And then my second one, pop. I'm like, oh no. And then slam, and the whole ground opens up underneath me. And I drop down to my chest in quicksand like mud. My backpack that's on is full of all my camera gear, lenses, the tripod, everything. And I'm sinking. And no one knows where I am. No, I mean, like, my closest, friend or family member is thousands of miles away. And this is it. I'm going to drown to death in this weird quicksand mud. And I was probably in there for 30 minutes, like
Oh my God.
struggling, and eventually able to grab this vine and pull myself out of it, and then get back to to a road, this like rural farm road. And I'm covered in mud. I'm bleeding and just soaking wet. And I look like a psychopath, I'm sure. And I just start wandering, just abjectly defeated down the road for hours. And finally, it's probably about 10:30 at night. And I come to this little village called Errol. And I thought there's got to be a motel, an Airbnb, something. And I'm just trying to find it, but the whole town is shut down. Everything's dark except for one windowless building with a neon letter P, which turned out to be the town pub. And it was a hopping night in there. There was tons of people in there. And I walked in, and at first everyone gave me crazy looks because I looked like a monster. But by the end of that night, I'd been drinking whiskey with the whole village of Errol for hours. Whole groups, small choruses had gotten together and were singing traditional songs in Gaelic to me and playing games. And we were playing, snooker and singing and whiskey. And I went back to camp out in somebody's backyard that night. And to this day, several years later, whenever I post anything on social media, which is rare, the village of Errol, the first people to ever respond and comment. They check on me all the time. They're wonderful. It just really made it worth the whole almost dying. And what they told me was a reed bed cultivated during the Second Napoleonic War to try to trap the French. Apparently, it didn't do anything to Napoleon, but it almost killed me.
Oh my God. That is amazing. No, that is like just amazing. Because, like I said, those are those moments. It's so funny because what you're talking about to me. So I always tell people one of the reasons that I love to travel, especially by myself, because many people have asked me, why do you travel by yourself so much, especially as a woman?
Yeah.
And I always tell them it's because I'm in pursuit of romance with life,
Oh,
right?
I love that.
Like that, yes, I believe in loving other people and I want to be loved back, but there's something about loving the world that is really meaningful to me. And that, I think the pursuit of that romantic relationship that I have with my own life has really led me down the type of, like, maybe not as intense as your experience, but similarly to where loving other people isn't easy, right? Romance isn't always flowers and hearts and perfection.
Absolutely.
It's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in a lot of ways. And so I feel like when you build that kind of romantic relationship with the world, it's like you really get to have that experience of, yes, I went through the struggles and I went through the fear and I went through, just the risk of my heart to do this. But at the end, you get to have moments like what you just described in the pub. And I've had those
Ah,
moments too, where I'm like, this is really me loving life, and not just loving life in a one sided way, but loving life in a way that I can receive back,
I totally
from the
understand.
universe.
Exaltation.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I love that. So as we wrap up, I'm curious to know two things. One,
Yeah.
are there places on your list that you haven't been that you plan to go in the future? I know I have those. I had to cancel a trip this year that I'll be re-engaging with as soon as possible to Greece, which is one of my been high on my list for quite a while. And then I'm also curious to know, is there anywhere that you've done a pilgrimage to that you'd like to return, that you'd do it again? So again, for me, I feel like I've made many pilgrimages to Puerto Rico. I
Yeah.
love that island. I almost always put it on my travel list every year to go back and do something different. But
Hmm.
yeah, so what are the places you haven't been that you want to go? And are there places you want to go back to?
I love that question. And I mean, yes, my list is huge, of course. And next is, and I'd saved it for so long, but I think it's almost time to go do the Santiago de Compostela pilgrimage and go to Spain. And in particular, I'm interested in the Portuguese route, starting probably in Porto and walking to Santiago. That's way up there. I had to cancel trips too to Turkey and South Africa. I'm really looking forward to going to explore those places. Possibly Egypt. There's a pilgrimage to Mount Sinai there. I really want to go back to Japan and continue to explore that. There's not any place in particular, I think, that I want to come back to necessarily. And that's something that for me, I kind of feel like time is a place. And I know that even if I went back looking to maybe that white sand beach Tregaul, where I heard crazy voices in the middle of the night when the full moon on the first night of the Scottish pilgrimage, that it wouldn't still be there, that it's different now. And so I guess for me, I'm just kind of waiting to see where I feel called, and then I'll be on the road as soon as I can.
Well, Gabe, I really appreciate your time today because this is a topic that I think you and I could talk about for another like 2 hours easily and share stories. I just really appreciate you telling us about your approach. I hope that other people really feel like they should consider this form of travel. Not that I don't think you should take vacations, but I think everybody, at least once in their life, should think about doing a trip where they really go on a more personal journey and explore themselves. So thank you so much for taking the time. And thank you everyone else for watching. Hopefully you will keep an eye out on social media for our next installment of What Are You Into? And Gabe, if you could just tell everybody, can they find you somewhere? How can they connect with you?
Oh, sure. And Sarah, thank you so much for having me. It's always wonderful talking with you. And yeah, if you ever want to find me for any reason, I'm pretty easy to find online, social media, just through my name, Gabriel Swinney, or Swinney Creative. And if you want something more personal, then, well, especially post-COVID, you can usually find me at one of the local breweries.
Excellent. Well, again, thank you all for watching and have a great rest of your day.